All right, nice to have you here. Today we start into the meat of Ecclesiastes. If you missed last week, I think it's kind of important that you get an orientation for the book as a whole. So if you weren't here last week, it is online and you can kind of go back and review that. I think that would help. I encourage you to do that. Last week we got into the author and the theme and all of that. The theme goes like this in verse 2. Vapor of vapors, says the teacher, vapor of vapors, everything is a vapor. And the word vapor just simply means a breath. Everything's like a breath. Everything's like, the fog that comes out of your mouth on a cold day. And there's nothing substantial to it. It's not useful. It's just there. And that is, he says everything is like that. And you say, what kind of a book is this? What? Is this in the Bible? Aren't you supposed to open your Bible and it cheers you up? And this doesn't sound like very cheerful news. Just to review a little bit about our talk concerning that, you can get the feeling like then everything is, if you have an NIV Bible, it says everything is meaningless. And I don't believe that translation intends you to think that there actually is no meaning. But from our standpoint, to where we stand, where the ground level we have to live on, a lot of stuff, we don't have enough information to know why this happened instead of that. What was going on there? Why did that person die and that one live? What was going on when two people got raised in the same family and one went this way and one went that way? And a lot of that, it's very hard to explain. So we talked about some of the things that challenge us in this book as we go through things that we feel in our bones probably each day we live, although as believers sometimes we don't admit that it's like that. So I talked about that last week, that sometimes as believers that have a Bible, we feel like, we've got an answer for everything. But in reality, we have an ultimate answer, but we don't have short-term answers to everything. The suffering that we see around us especially. Why this and not that? And so we see that life is fleeting. Nothing under the sun lasts. It's frail. Nothing turns out to be enough. It's futile. Nothing works out the way you would want it. And it's frustrating. There's nothing you can fully control or fully understand. So something as simple as you're looking at me and say, why are you dressed up today? And so I'm just saying, hey, this is what preachers would do in the past, right? They would wear their three-piece suit and a white shirt and a tie and shoes, even though that wasn't on the list of what you had to do. So I thought of coming in here with no shoes on. But I did this because nowadays no one would be, caught dead wearing what I'm wearing today. But isn't it interesting how something that was accepted and old was new, and now what is old now looks new to us? Because how many people have a tie on today? I'm having trouble finding anybody. Yeah. Okay, so let's just take care of this right now. Didn't want to wear this anyway, so there we go. It's a nice tie, actually, but Okay, now we're ready. Verse 3, let's get into it. What do people, and it literally says men, but it means mankind and humankind, what do people get for all their hard work they do under the sun? What do people get? So we're going to call this the payoff question. Is the toil, all that toil, is it worth all the effort? What do you get for it? What's the profit? What's the benefit? What's the payoff? What's the dividend? What's the advantage of doing all the stuff that we do? It doesn't mean just the work that you do that you get paid for, but it includes that, of course. It's the stuff that you do under the sun. It's not talking about the heat of the sun. It's just universality of it and the fact that this is all from ground level. So we're doing all of this wherever we are, wherever the sun shines, which I guess Washington State's not really part of this verse, but pretty much the rest of the world. Now, the teacher is asking a question that every day kind of brings this into every day. Because when he says everything is a vapor, so what does he mean? Oh yeah, right down to just the stuff you do. everyday stuff. And he actually is asking a question that many people feel, but we kind of quit asking because it seems like there isn't necessarily a great answer to it. Unless you read Proverbs. And they say, wait a minute, Proverbs kind of helps you on this. You can read Proverbs 12:11. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Or Proverbs 14:23 uses that word toil again. That's the hard work, all the strains of what you do. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty. So evidently, our writer of Ecclesiastes forgot to read Proverbs 14:23 because it says it does bring profit. But that's not the answer he wants you to come to. Proverbs, as you know, if you misuse Proverbs, then you think all of these are promises. But it doesn't always work that way. When you get a pink slip from your work, and so you're gone, this verse could become your life verse. You can put it on, what do people get for all their hard work they do under the sun, with a little bite to it? And so we're expecting that the answer to that, based on the previous verse, that it's all vapor, would be, what is the profit? Little or nothing, in regard to kind of ultimate stuff. And so we're going to try to understand that. In fact, let's start with your job. Let's ask if we have a satisfying answer to the question, what do you get for all the hard work you do? So when my dad was not a pastor, he was a bricklayer, so I kind of chose a bricklayer. So what was the good of all that? Maybe my dad's paycheck was enough. But to be honest, is your paycheck really your value? If that's the case, then my value maybe not be that much, is it? Or do you get paid so much that you wouldn't welcome a raise because you're so satisfied? Or is the work itself all that satisfying and rewarding in itself? Maybe not. Isn't it often frustrating? And you wonder if you can stand going in one more Monday morning. Some of you guys do stuff, you could not pay me enough to do the jobs you do. In fact, if I tried to do your job, they wouldn't pay me anyway. But you think about it. Would you complain about an early retirement at full pay? Doesn't your experience of this frustration just prove the verdict where this thing is going here in verse 2? Everything is a vapor. Here's a guy that felt it, a guy named Leonard Wolfe. He was, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, one of the outstanding men of his time. Lived mostly in the early 19th century. And so he was assessing his life. He was an author, wrote over 20 books, had his own publishing house, published all the novels of his very infamous wife, Virginia Woolf. And here's what he said. I see clearly that I have achieved practically nothing. The world today and the history of the human anthill during the past 5 to 7 years would be exactly the same if I had played ping pong, instead of sitting on committees and writing books and memoranda. I have therefore to make a rather ignominious confession that I have in a long life ground through between 150,000 and 200,000 hours of perfectly useless work. Not a guy you'd want to live with. Anyway, well, you invest your life, and what's the profit? He uses the word, kind of a commercial term for payoff or dividends. So we're really talking here not just about your job, but the hard work of living, everything that goes on. So, think of all the dishes and cups you have washed, and then you go through the house, and there's that odd glass that's still sitting in the bedroom, and you just seems like you can never wash them all. And then you do the dishes all over again in a few hours for what? Who is grateful? You design and build a beautiful house, and then years later, your kids or your grandkids totally remodel the thing so it doesn't even look like the same house. Or let's say it's the kingdom, It lasted only 24 years. For a building that big to have such a small lifespan is amazing. It took 18 years to plan it and build it, and it imploded in 18 seconds. And they still owed $80 million on it. Some of you are saying, what's a kingdom? Well, this is all work we do under the sun. So there it is, and then it's gone. It suggests how life must be if you don't factor God's part into it. And so we're not going to run to try to interject him here. If you had a way to rule out God's part in your work, can you honestly say it would be entirely worth it. Is there an adequate return for your effort? So here's the thesis that leaks out of this unanswered question. Hard work produces weariness, but no commensurate, meaningful progress. Everything tends to come back around to be done all over again. So we have that old song that I remember hearing in the 50s. How many of you are alive in the 50s? A few of you, yeah. So you remember 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Yeah. So now here's a question, though, that maybe is rattling around in your brain by now. Should we be content with this? Is that kind of why this is in Ecclesiastes? Or should we argue and complain and campaign for something more meaningful? Is this possibly a dissatisfaction because there's a longing for a new creation? Would it not be a denial of heaven itself if we found a way to numb ourselves to this frustration? Listen to me. Would you be sinning if you complain about futility in life, or would you be sinning if you don't? I don't know if I know the answer to that exactly. I just want you to think about it. Well, the teacher now gives us 5 examples of this seeming futility. What are your chances of breaking free of this vapor thing and finding the secret that will guarantee that hard work and, it'll be successful and fulfilling, that you can make it happen, that you will do stuff and it truly is significant and you're significant? Well, he's going to point to some things that maybe help you see that maybe that's a little more out of reach. The first one is the round of human generations. Verse 4, a generation goes and a generation rises while the earth just stays the same. NSB says stands forever or remains forever, I think something like that. And it's not implying that it's going to last forever, because we know it won't. God's going to destroy it and there will be a new heavens and new earth. But even that will be some of the same. It's still a heavens and an earth. We all long for something substantial that moves somewhere when you work hard at it. We want progress for our labors. What we get, however, is pretty impermanent, circular, and repetitive without progress. So he says, look how one generation follows another. As one generation is losing its teeth, another is cutting them. So one grandpa is shrinking and he doesn't want to measure himself anymore. His grandson is sprouting and it's like he rechecks his height every other day. Or it'd be like this. We had our 13th grandson this week on Tuesday. You can clap right now. That's great. The labor was very easy on me. It was great. So our son Stephen had another baby with a fair amount of work by his wife Alyssa. But anyway, the baby was born on the 25th of April, which is the baby's great-grandfather's birthday. His great-grandpa would have been 103, but he's been gone for 10 years, 9 or 10 years. So he's named after that grandpa. His middle name is the same as his grandpa's name, David. And so, but he'll never see him in this life. He'll never know him. It'll just all be by story. So you see how one generation comes and could be well gone by the time there's another one coming, another precious baby. While all this is happening, the eternal hills look on while generations crank in and out. It's business as usual for old planet Earth. I have pictures of 6 generations of Stagbards posing in front of Mount Rainier, not all at the same time. The solid Earth just provides a backdrop to mock our transitoriness and our haughty self-importance. Anyway, we're reminded of this. We have a birth and a funeral in the same week sometimes. In fact, Earl's first funeral is, I think I have this right, his first funeral was the same week or even the same day that he brought his first baby home from the hospital. So as one goes, another arrives to take his or her place. So schools and governments and churches rise and they fall only to be replaced by others. Now, in fact, you can see this all over creation. So he's going to start going into things like the sun and what's the second one? Wind. Then the third one's going to be water, rivers. So let's think about that, how futility shows up in the creation itself. So here's the steadiness of the mountains, but when you look at other things, you see the circularity. And so he says in verse 5, here's number 2, The sun rises and the sun sets only to hurry around to rise again. So natural things operate perfectly well according to natural laws, but they don't move things to any real end or destiny. It's interesting how we get insight from observing nature. The creation tells us a lot about God, the Creator, but it also tells us a lot about man, fallen and cursed, because the creation is cursed with us. If we go back to Genesis, in fact, philosopher Peter Kreeft says when he's going to teach Genesis, he always teaches Ecclesiastes first. So they get this idea of kind of that the fall is real, that is something you struggle with, that this is a true thing. So the cursing of the ground for man's sake and all of that. Well, we look at the sun. It's bright and it's wondrous in the sky a couple of weeks a year. There's a certain security in knowing that the sun will be back the next morning for a repeat performance. I was checking the weather deal. The sun is going to go to bed tonight at 8:19, and it'll be up tomorrow morning at 5:53. And you can pretty much count on it. That's the kind of predictability we can live with. But there's a certain very repetitiveness to it as well. A little bit of, like the movie Groundhog Day. Here's the sun again. Just happened every day of my life. You can count how many thousands or hundreds if you're very young. Sun comes up again. It does nothing but hurry around and the cosmic track as the earth spins on its axis only to start all over again. The word hurry here means to pant and gasp like a runner breathing heavily to reach the finish only to be told he has to run another lap. Well, think about the wind. Look at verse 6. The wind blows south, it turns north, here and there, twisting back and forth, circling back to start all over again. So the wind, it's like it's blowing in some direction, but then it changes its mind. It's like it's trying to get somewhere important, but can't figure out what it is. One time, they were going to have a hard storm, and north wind came in the fall, and all my leaves were still on my grass. It came in and sweat, and it raked my whole lawn. And I put it on an order for the next year to happen again. And I do that every year, and so far, the wind doesn't know what it's doing. So what's the big hurry? What's the deal with the wind? Well, let me skip this. Do you know the odds are that your next breath will contain one of the same molecules Jesus exhaled on his last breath on the cross? There's a book called Innumeracy by a guy named John Paulos. And he's done the math on this. If you get the book, he can show it to you. The odds are that 99% that one of the molecules that he breathed out so long ago, you just will breathe in. Everyone take in a breath. Isn't that odd? Anyway. But what's meaningful about that? I don't know, probably none. It all comes around again. Endless wind cycles, and the weather, there's some patterns that you can predict, but follows pathways influenced by tides and land masses and the tilt of the earth and all that. Repetition and nothing to show for it. Our winds never make it to Mars or Venus where they could use some fresh air. All right, that would be progress. Well, it's not just sun and wind. What about water? All right, so another verse 7. All the rivers run to the sea, but the sea is never full. The rivers keep right on flowing to the same place. Well, let's say you were born as a river and you were given the task of carrying water to the sea. You started in the early morning, but eventually far off down the valley, you would spot the sea where you can finally see where you're supposed to unload your cargo. And you do that with a heave of satisfaction and cool your feet in the shallow pools where there's a fresh water and salt mix, and it dawns on you that the bay is at the same level as it was yesterday when you delivered your same load. You get what I'm saying. It's like dumping water into a bathtub where the drain is open. Now, he doesn't talk about evaporation and all that kind of cycle, but we know how it works, why the sea never gets full. But the sea is never satisfied. So sometimes we feel that way. Many a slave in the Old South had this heart, although this what we call a Negro spiritual was written later, but, Old Man River. That old man river, he don't hear nothing, don't say nothing. He keeps on rolling along. So you guys know that song from Showboat, yeah. And the last verse goes like this: I get weary, sick of trying. I'm tired of living, but I'm scared of dying. But old man river, he just keeps rolling along. Well, that takes you right into verse 8, because here's the fifth example. Tired humans with all the tedious, forgettable, repetitive effort. Everything leads to weariness, a weariness too deep for words. Our eyes can never see enough to be satisfied. Our ears can never hear enough. So, over and over, doesn't it? It'll make you tired. One version says it's all unspeakably tiresome. The fatigue of futility. Now, it can be tiring and tiresome. Tiresome is a word for monotony. And it gets boring to do the same old things over and over. They're boring to the eye and to the ear, according to verse 8. That's because the problem is not out there, it's inside of us. And so now, the fifth example of hard work getting done with futility, it's us. It's not nature or life that has failed us, like somehow can't come up with something to make things more interesting or original. The futility is inside us, like an insatiable sea. So we keep seeing, but we just feel like there ought to be more. We keep hearing, but it's the same thing over and over, and we're not satisfied. There's a big vacuum in our heart that refuses to get filled. And in some way, that's true even if you know God, that there is something yet coming. This earth is not remade yet. There's just stuff that doesn't work. It's not primarily an attitude problem. You got a great attitude, but it's not like you're a spoiled child. It's just got to have something new. It's a reality problem. Even with the best attitudes, a person on this earth is going to see something wonderful, and that will make him just want to see more. If he hears a beautiful song, he only wants more music. When I hear the playing of Gabriel's oboe, I play it over and over because there's one chord in there that makes me weep. And it's the kind of weeping I want to do. It's just beauty. But I can't hear it just once. You can't hear Beethoven's Fifth and be so satisfied you don't want a Beethoven's Sixth, which is the soundtrack to Fantasia. Well, it's interesting, it's just a little aside here. The people that heard Beethoven's Fifth for the first time never had to wait to hear Beethoven's Sixth. He wrote 9, because they were performed on the same night for the first time, and Beethoven decided to direct the Sixth Symphony before the Fifth, because he had finished them the same year. But for those of us that weren't there, we get to number 9, and there are no more, because he died. He got so deaf. He wrote half of those when he was deaf anyway. Oh man, so he's gone. And that's kind of the way it works. You just get exhausted trying to find the satisfaction that lasts. You're the sea that never gets filled up. You want to make it all work for you, but it just doesn't. You want to make a difference, but it's no use. You kind of feel sometimes insignificant because you can't push against the vapor. Tom Brokaw wrote this: "It's easy to make a buck, it's a lot harder to make a difference." And some of us wonder if we ever have. Well, the teacher explains the source of all this weariness in the last verses, so let's read those. What has happened before will happen again. What has been done before will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Look, they say, here's something new. But no, it all happened before, long before our time. We just don't remember what happened in those former times. In the NIV, the way it translates it, we don't remember the people that did them either. And as for future generations, no one will later remember what they did either. So we think maybe something will come along that will be different. We say, oh, that's new, but with every generation, they're seeking for novelty. It's not necessarily new. Paul encountered this when he was preaching in Athens. It says the philosophers there used to spend their time in nothing other than telling or hearing something new. But was it new, or was it the same old, same old? I think this is really interesting that the American poet Ralph Waldo Emerson observed, all my best thoughts were stolen by the ancients. But here's the ironic thing about that even that one, even that thought, about 15 centuries before, the tutor of St. Jerome, which is Donatus, complained about the exact same thing. He said, confound those, which in less polite society, he would say, damn those who make comments before us, our comments before us. So, is there anything new? You come up with this original way of understanding the Bible, and some cult actually taught that back in the 300s. The teacher. He's not talking about new inventions, by the way, like the creation of sliced bread and the electric shaver. I don't know what was the greatest thing before sliced bread, but now that we have it, there it is. Well, he's talking about finding something that can break you out of the repetitious futility and into some kind of destiny. Things that hold out the promise of doing that, however, are just the same old things. There's a new recipe, but it's still eating. If you come up with a new kind of music, it will eventually be replaced, just like the last one. Things that look the same are just the same, that look different are just the same old thing from a different angle. And so skirt lengths get recycled and elephant jokes come back. And preachers start wearing different stuff when they preach. But then there are also the new moralities that are really ancient debaucheries, but with waterproof mascara. Think about it. And he says, we just have a bad memory, verse 11. Of course, it feels new if you don't remember. We hardly recall what happened just a few months ago. And when the things that happen tomorrow are in the past, nobody's going to remember them either. And here's how that strikes me. That if you dwell on this, it makes everything look insignificant, like it'll just be forgotten. I mean, how many of you know the name of one of my great-great-grandfathers? I don't even know 7 of them. And I had to work hard to find out there was a Gottfried Stabbert that was born around 1800. But we don't remember these people. They're gone. We don't know what they did. And then it strikes you that even you could be totally forgotten, even though you have worked your fingers to the bone your whole life. It's a short jump from everything is meaningless to feeling like I am meaningless. I am insignificant. Well, I want you to look at a short clip from a movie, Ants, and see if you can relate to the guy on the couch.
All my life, I lived and worked in a big city, which, now that I think of it, is kind of a problem, since I always feel uncomfortable around crowds. I mean it. I have this fear of enclosed spaces. Everything makes me feel trapped all the time. I always tell myself there's got to be something better out there, but maybe I think too much. I think everything must go back to the fact that I had a very anxious childhood. My mother never had time for me. When you're the middle child in a family of 5 million, you don't get any attention. I mean, how's it possible? And I've always had these abandonment issues which plagued me. My father was basically a drone, like I've said, and the guy flew away when I was just a larva. And my job, don't get me started on, because it really annoys me. I was not cut out to be a worker. I'll tell you right now. I feel physically inadequate. My whole life, I've never been able to lift more than 10 times my own body weight. And when you get down to it, handling dirt is not my idea of a rewarding career. It's this whole gung-ho superorganism thing that I can't get. I try, but I don't get it. I mean, what is it? I'm supposed to do everything for the colony, and what about my needs? What about me? I mean, I gotta believe there's some place out there that's better than this. Otherwise, I would just curl up in a larval position and weep. The whole system makes me feel insignificant.
Excellent. You've made a real breakthrough.
I have?
Yes, Z. You are insignificant.
I am?
So, here we go. I'm on. So that clip is actually 25 years old now. I know, I couldn't believe it. But any less relevant today? I don't think so. In fact, as Bruce just pointed out, what has happened before will happen again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. So kind of the funny thing about how we're going to teach this book of Ecclesiastes here at FBC is, for those of you who were here before, back in, 19 years ago, 2004, you were there. Anyone else was there? I was down the hallway in the high school Sunday school classroom at the time, so I was not in here for it. But for those who were here, it's going to sound and look a little bit familiar. We're going to do the same basic format that we did last time. Although last time, what would happen is Bruce would get up here for about 20 minutes or so to kind of teach through the text, and then Earl would come up here for another 20 minutes or so and reflect on it. And I'm going to do that part now. So if some of the things I'm saying sound familiar to you, I will just remind you, look, they say here's something new, but no, it all happened before, long before our time. So there you go. So then what is the point? What's the point? That's the question that is raised right here. Or as Bruce put it there, is all the toil that we do, all this hard work, is it worth the effort? We can't avoid this question. It's the question I hope that we can kind of lean into here in this time of reflection at the end. Like, if all this is vapor and vanity and meaningless, then what are we doing and why? I'm insignificant, says Z the ant, right? You've made a real breakthrough, says the therapist. Really? How so? I think the writer of Ecclesiastes would agree with that. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Such a Hebrew way of putting that. The toil with which he toils. But I just think it reflects, again, kind of the cyclical nature of this. We toil at our toil. And we toil and toil and toil, yet here we are. What's the answer? There's rivers flowing. The sun rising and setting, everything. The writer of Ecclesiastes probably didn't have this conception of cosmology, but even our planet, is going around in a circle, and it's turning on a circle. It's circles after circles after circles, and we're just kind of riding that thing. All is weariness, a chasing after the wind. There's nothing gained under the sun. The Hebrew term for this is hevel, which Bruce used 2 weeks ago. And I think it's a good one for us to we don't always, try to memorize Hebrew terms or whatever. This is a good one, I think, to have in your back pocket because it comes up so much over this series. And it's a good one. It's almost one you could almost use like a swear word, but one you won't get in trouble for. It's hevel. When you see this, when you feel the vaporousness of everything, you just want to cry out, it's hevel all around us. So then, why? What is the point? What I hope we can do in this time of reflection here as we kind of close out this really what's almost like an opening poem in the book of Ecclesiastes is to look at this question from 4 different angles. You can see there on the back of your handout there listed kind of the 4 different angles that we're going to look at this from. Kind of, I guess, 4 different aspects of this writer's question that make it both, I would say, extremely uncomfortable for modern minds like ours to grapple with. It's a question we don't even want to think about, we don't want to ask. Yet at the same time, really a question that's potentially powerful and liberating for us to think about. How can this be? Well, the first aspect, let's just put this up here, that we acknowledge this is a question that modern people fear. By and large, this is a question we don't want to ask. We're afraid to. The philosopher Peter Kreeft, I love how he puts it, and Bruce gave me his book kind of reflecting on Ecclesiastes earlier this week, and I was reading, I'm like, wow, this guy must really have his pulse on the people of today and what's going on with all of us with our smartphones and social media and instant news and all this. And I looked in the front and it was published in 1989. So I'm going to quote this guy quite a bit in this, but just know, again, nothing is new under the sun. The troubles and the restlessness of the modern heart from 40 years ago it's happening right now in different expressions. But anyways, here's how he put this. He says, Ecclesiastes is such a terrifying book to the modern mind, to modern thinkers, because it shows modernity's greatest fear, which is not so much the fear of death That was ancient man's greatest fear. Or the fear of sin or guilt or hell. That was medieval man's greatest fear. But the fear of meaninglessness, of vanity, of the existential vacuum, of the fear of nothingness with a capital N. So this, by and large, is why we don't ask this question in our culture, because we're afraid of the answer. Maybe even more afraid there isn't an answer. And like as Kreeft is alluding to right here, this was not always the case, like historically speaking. You know, you read the great thinkers of the past, and the ancients, their writings are full of this question right here. The question of ethics is how this was usually posed. Ethics with a capital E, meaning basically, how then should we live? Based on the deeper question of what is the purpose of human life? Kind of what are we here for? What's the point? C.S. Lewis used the analogy of three ships, or kind of a flotilla of ships sailing along to illustrate kind of the three aspects of this question that the philosophers would ponder. Okay, the question of ethics. So if you're going to send a group of ships sailing across the ocean, they kind of have to answer three different questions. One would be how not to bump into each other, okay, and cause a shipwreck. That would be the question of social ethics. So how ought we to treat one another so we're not bumping into each other? Second would be the question of how to stay afloat and basically not shipwreck yourself. That would be the question of individual ethics, how to stay ship shape so you're not springing leaks, sailing along. But then third, and this is the question that in our culture there seems to be an unwillingness to want to address, and more often than not to ignore. I mean, we'll talk about those first two plenty. People will argue all the time about how we ought to treat each other and be very adamant about this is how we ought to do that. And also very adamant and strong for that second question about how to take care of yourself, self-care, and how to treat yourself the way that you ought to be treated, right? But the third question is the one that's most important. This is the one we don't think about enough, and that is, where on earth are we sailing in the first place? What's our heading? What is the point, right? Our purpose, direction. Kreeft sums this up like this. He says, the question Ecclesiastes raises is so deep that only an answer that is deeper still can satisfy the mind and heart that dare to ask it. And if such an answer is not forthcoming, we must either run from the question in dishonest cover-up or run from life in despair. These are the two running sores that plague the modern world. So we observed in 1989, so we say amen in 2023. Which leads to the second aspect of this question. Because this is a question that we fear, this then is a question we try to ignore. And we have all sorts of ways to do that. One is you could just plug your ears. Literally, plug your ears with earbuds, start listening to a podcast about fantasy football, right? Or by binge watching something, or doing anything or everything we can just to kind of take our minds off the hevel that is all around us. We're like the characters in an old Mutt and Jeff cartoon. This was a cartoon that ran in the earlier parts of the 20th century. And one writer shares this one that I think just captures perfectly how we try to ignore this question by manufacturing meaning when in fact there is none. Here's how the cartoon is described. Jeff is standing next to a pile of stones with a lit lantern on top in the middle of a road at night. Can you picture that? Mutt comes along, sizes up the situation, and asks, Jeff, did you put that lantern there? Yes, Mutt. Why? To warn the cars away so they wouldn't crack up on the stones. Oh, and did you put the stones there too? Yes, Mutt. Why? To hold the lantern up, of course. And so we go about our days, piling up stones and lighting lanterns until one day we die and the story is over. Hevel, vapor, right? Nevertheless, as much as we would like to ignore the question that we fear so much. Third aspect to this, we cannot. This is a question we cannot avoid. That's why I think it haunts us so much. Life doesn't let us avoid this question. This world doesn't let us, because Hevel is all around us. We see it in so many ways. Bruce shared so many good illustrations of this, getting laid off from a job, that sort of thing. Or, you train, 2 years to run a marathon, you tear your ACL right before the race, something like that. I mean, we had a major appliance break this week in our house, and just thinking about, going through the hassle of figuring out, it was a dryer for our clothes. We're figuring out a new dryer to buy, got to go pick this thing up. I'm having my dad and my brother-in-law over this afternoon. We're going to try to haul the thing out of the basement, haul the new one down, and I'm just thinking, well, we're going to haul this thing out of the basement again in 15 years, and it's going to end up in the dump like the other one, and it's just all, how many dryers every year end up in the dump? It's just, Hevel is all around us. It would be, you guys could keep a journal this week and just write down all the Hevel that you encounter on a daily basis. It's all around us. And I think the people who are the best at reminding us of this are the artists among us, the playwrights and the movie makers, the poets. That's why we're going to use, film clips throughout this whole series. And again, a lot of these film clips are going to be 20 years old, because that's when we first did this series. Bruce showed me some of the film clips they had from this, and he set a VHS cassette on my desk. And I was like, what on earth? How are we going to do this? But you know what? They're still resonant. They're still relevant today. Here's another example from the past. Samuel Beckett, who was a playwright, he debuted his new play, Breath. This was on June 16th, 1969 at the New Eden Theater in New York City. The whole play, it's only 35 seconds long. No dialogue. Some of you out there are like, finally a play I could actually want to see. But this is what happens. The curtain opens to show a pile of trash on a stage, okay? Lights come up, that's all you see. Then you hear a baby's cry, like a baby that's just been born, a newborn crying. Then you hear a breath, inhale, exhale. You can watch this thing on YouTube. It's kind of creepy. And then the play is over. That's it. Curtain closes. Everyone's like, I paid $48 for this, But Hevel, the playwright is saying, Hevel, this is what it is. This is life. It's meaningless. It's short. There you have it. Or think of all the examples, and I could do a ton of these. One of the reasons we can't avoid this question is it comes up in music all the time. I was talking with Susan Westring about it this week. She helps, script a lot of the worship songs we sing in the second half, and she was talking about, boy, it's kind of hard to find some worship songs that really, hit the themes of Ecclesiastes. And I said, Susan, let me help you out. I mean, we could make a whole play. We could start right after the sermon. We could go with Kansas, Dust in the Wind. All we are is dust in the wind, right? And then right after that, move into Simon and Garfunkel. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Sit and talk with you again. And then after announcements, we all stand. We kind of want to be a little bit of an upbeat note, so we could do Les Miserables. I dreamed a dream in times gone by. We do the Susan Boyle version of it, and we all just, we walk out here. I'm sure you guys could add dozens and dozens of songs to this list. One I didn't even notice till this week was Pink Floyd's album, Dark Side of the Moon, okay? And I'm surprised I hadn't really made this connection, because my buddy Josh and I used to listen to this a lot when we were in college, because we would go over to the Pacific Science Center Laser Dome, and they did this laser show, and you could stand on your back and you just hear this whole album straight through, and there's all these lasers above you. We were not using drugs at all, but we just enjoyed the music. And the first song on the album, really this whole album is bookended by Ecclesiastes. First song on the album, the opener, run, rabbit, run. Dig that hole, forget the sun. And when at last the work is done, don't sit down, it's time to dig another one. For long you live and high you fly, but only if you ride the tide, and balanced on the biggest wave, you race towards an early grave. Hear the echoes of Ecclesiastes in there? And then now jump ahead to the last song in the album. You could go through all of these songs, because in the middle it deals with a lot of the themes of Ecclesiastes: wisdom, madness, and folly, okay? Money, all of these are in the middle. And then the very last song on the album, the bookend. All that you touch all that you see, all that you taste, all you feel, all that you love, all that you hate, all you distrust, all you save, all that you give, all that you deal, all that you buy, beg, borrow, or steal, all you create, all you destroy, all that you do, all that you say, all that you eat, and everyone you meet, and all that you slight, and everyone you fight, all that is now, all that is gone, all that's to come, and everything under the sun, direct language from Ecclesiastes, is in tune, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And then, of course, those final cryptic lines over the sound of a beating heart that are just kind of murmured at the end of the album. There is no dark side to the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all dark. Hevel, meaningless, vapor. This is the question that haunts our culture. This is the question we cannot avoid because God, in his grace, does not want us to. Fourth aspect to this question, this is the question we need. We need this question. Again, Peter Kreeft, he says, the modern world has no answer to the biggest and most obvious question of all, what is it all there for? What are we here for? All toil, all that we do, all human pursuits here under the sun, all civilization, all arts and sciences. Again, I wonder if he was listening to Pink Floyd when he wrote this. Come down in the end for most people, most of the time, to a forgetting, a diversion, a cover-up, a series of complex masks over this one simple, terrifying truth. Ecclesiastes rips off the cover and plunges our squeamish and reluctant eyes into this terrifying abyss. It is a revelation in the literal sense, a revealing, an unveiling, an uncovering. Ecclesiastes blows our cover. And oh, how we need this. We need this. This may, in fact, be why you're here today, because God wants to do some dismantling in your heart. He wants to blow your cover. He wants to kick over the piles of stones that you've been making all your life to set lanterns on top, so that maybe you can latch onto something better. We appreciate a thing only by contrast. And Ecclesiastes is the contrast, the alternative to the rest of the Bible. The question to which the rest of the Bible is the answer. There is nothing more meaningless than an answer without a question. This is why we need Ecclesiastes. So are you ready to live in the question for a while? Are you ready to let God's word in Ecclesiastes through the teacher blow your cover and dismantle those things and those structures by which we find meaning apart from God? Some of those hooks that are in your heart that are pulling you this way and that way with anxiety and fears and trouble. Will you allow this book to untether you from some of those things so that maybe you might latch on to something better, someone better? Really, I don't think there's a way to do this without really living in this question for a while, without kind of living in this darkness, looking into that abyss, as Peter Kreeft puts it. This is an overhead slide transparency, okay? This is part of what Earl gave to me earlier this week when he gave me his notes from Ecclesiastes, many of which were handwritten, which is awesome because I think typewriters were just hitting the mass market in 2004. And church budget hadn't splurged for one yet, but we were getting there. But what I love about this is the quote that he put on here, which he said for him became sort of a motto or a rallying cry that he revisited throughout this series in Ecclesiastes, really trying to deal with this book on its own terms and live in this darkness. He said, kicking against the darkness until it bleeds daylight. Kicking against the darkness until it bleeds daylight. And so for the next several months at FBC, through the through the end of July, this is what we're going to do. It's not all going to be like this. It's not all going to be questions without answers, I hope, but there is going to be a whole lot of questions that we really need to look at and deal with week by week, topic by topic, and let the grace of God, through his word, through the teacher, do the dismantling that needs to take place in all of our hearts. Will you pray with me, please? Father, we're grateful for your word. We're grateful for the truth that it exposes about this world, the truth about us. A lot of times it's truth we don't want to hear because we would rather live in our delusions that keep us at the center of everything and keep life easy and pleasant. But Father, now I ask that you would use this book of Ecclesiastes to do your good work in us, in our church, that you would demolish whatever needs to be demolished, that you would expose in us whatever needs to be exposed, and that through this cleansing work, this dismantling work, that you would build in each of us and all of us together something far better. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.